See, told you. Hey, everybody, it is a pleasure beyond measure to be here with class number 3. And you know, we're going to go head on to the issues that are currently plaguing our culture somewhat, only somewhat. So what we're going to look at tonight are what we have begun to call the Clobber Passages. These are the passages in the Bible that certain folks claim prove that God hates LGBTQ folk. But what you're going to discover, I hope, with this presentation is that that is far from certain, and it is actually most likely unlikely. Because there are very real explanations for most of the details in these passages in the Judeo-Christian Bible. And I put these around because, you know, I mentioned it at the top, but I don't really think I mentioned it last week. And so next Friday is this film. Now, you should know that this class came about really from the wonderful nudging of Alex and Maddie, who wanted to show this film. And I said, we shouldn't just show the film, we should have a Bible study class in advance to get people sort of into it. And this film is 1946, the Mistranslation that shifted culture. And what this is going to show is how a major new, supposedly scholarly translation of the Bible deliberately chose not to use the Greek words and the details that seem to actually be in the text, and to make it simple and make it easier to conclude to the common reader that maybe the Almighty does condemn homosexuality and perhaps homosexuals themselves, which is where some folks seem to be going today. And so that's why we started this class with a general understanding of the Bible and how you can see it in many different ways. Talking about how it is a book of books, talking about how we come to this common text in so many different perspectives and possibilities that although we can speak about this text, it is really hard to speak about it with perfect certainty. All right, so I just want to make sure that we understand some of these. All right, so that's where we are right now with this. I'm going to go around and make sure we know who's in the room. This is going to be a little more brief, and then I'll share something about next Thursday, and don't let me forget to remind you about that again. But make sure you come next Friday. Bring your friends, bring your mothers, bring your friends' mothers. I have no idea where I picked up that line from, but I actually put that on the flyer for a party I had in college, and my buddy actually brought his mom, who was like the cool mom of the dorm. And so I'm Reverend Scott, he, him, co-minister.
John Lytle, he, him.
David Popeil, yeah.
Mary Jones, she, her. Sue Roffer, she, her.
Alex Thompson, they, them.
Maddie Wilson, she, her.
Jeff Grable, you, him.
Vivian, she, her.
All right, Leanne and then Maria.
Leanne, she, her.
Maria Tao, she, her.
Foxy. I think Foxy, we just lost Foxy. Syl
Knutson, she, her.
Kenny.
Hi, Kenny, he, him.
Uh-oh. I hope that's an internet connection and not your voice.
Maybe a mixture of both.
Oh, sorry to hear that, buddy.
Chantel, Whitman's, she, her.
And your, she, her.
Mary Beth Kane, she, her. Victoria Santavirgio, she, her. Is that seats? Is that?
It's wide open. I think it even has your name on it. Yep.
Yes, yeah.
Come on down, everybody.
Thank you all. So I'm gonna start with some. Mhm. Yeah, so sweet. Good to have you so close so I can keep an eye on you.
She's dangerous.
And so, we're gonna start just with some general discussion about, or presentation, I should say, and I actually have. Something I'm gonna do some screen share with when we go through these passages, cause it's just easier to encounter it that way. For me, so. One of the interesting things to remember about the Bible. We talked about it being a book of books written by many people for many different audiences over long periods of time. Any given book is often more than one author. Sometimes there seems to have been a committee, like the priestly book, like the opening of Genesis. Seemed to have been like there's a committee that this is the structure we want, and let's execute that. Another thing about the Bible is that the Bible is a book about the divine and our potential relationship with the divine. It's not necessarily a book about human sexuality, but because it's going to talk about what it means to be human, of course it's going to have to touch on sexuality because that's a big part of who we are. Very simple, I believe. It's, I like to say that the Bible is the story of God's love for the world and the people of this world, and it tells a history of God's love at work, rescuing, renewing, empowering humankind. And it was never intended to be like a rule book about human sexuality. In fact, the Bible accepts sexual practices that we condemn and condemns sexual practices that we accept. Lots of them. Here's just a few examples. And, if you like, I can share these notes when I send out my class notes. There's no reason for you to rush to these passages. So these are both from Deuteronomy. Remember, Deuteronomy means secondary teaching, and it seems to be a whole class of authors beyond the Yahwist and the Elohim and the priesthood. Deuteronomy 22 has these two different passages. If it's discovered that a bride is not a virgin, the Bible demands she be executed by stoning immediately. But we actually don't, hear even the right wingers saying that's what we should do.
Yeah.
Another passage in Deuteronomy 22, if a married person has sex with someone else's husband or wife, the Bible commands that both.
You might have a visitor.
Hey, Dana, how you doing, buddy? I can see you after class. Okay. Here, let me take you for a walk. Sing a song whilst I take a walk. What's happening? Hot stuff.
Yeah.
Couple months before we start hearing about the executing virgin. Oh, yeah. Months, right? Yeah. Well.
Hey, guys, could we have one conversation, please, for those of us listening through the mic?
Well, we actually.
Reverend Scott left the room.
Conversation.
There's no real.
Oh, okay.
Welcome to my. Oh, good old Dana. Very disappointed he couldn't tell me his story again.
Oh, God.
So I started telling it back to him. He's like, you remember? I'm like, I love Dana.
The same story.
Yeah.
So Deuteronomy 22:22 says that if a married person has sex with someone else's husband or wife, the Bible commands that they both be stoned to death. Well, that actually isn't at least current law in New Jersey anyway. Mark 10 says divorce is strictly forbidden, as is remarriage of anyone who has been divorced. we don't see that. The Bible forbids in Leviticus a married couple from having sexual intercourse during menses, and if they disobey, they both shall be executed. Mark 12 says if a man dies childless, his widow is ordered by law to have intercourse with each of his brothers until she becomes pregnant. And at least yet, Project 25 has not commanded that.
Isn't that
Here-
just the opposite of what the other one said?
Of course, well, no, because he's dead.
He's dead.
Oh, but they can't get married, but just because they give that deceased husband an heir if they're childless. If I die childless. it's the fault.
But these are all kind of added on since the readings that you gave us.
Well, coming back to that. I'm just letting you know the other, this is to demonstrate without, this is something we can be a little clear about. And let me do this, Deuteronomy, if a man gets into a fight with another man and his wife this is a funny one. If a man gets into a fight with another man and his wife tries to rescue her husband by grabbing the other man's genitals, her hand shall be cut off
Oh, God.
Oh.
and no pity shall be shown her.
So specific.
So,
A little too.
I mean, I just want to
Sounds
know.
like someone's personal experience.
Yeah, there's a backstory there.
Yes, there is, boss. Debbie
Real
Ann.
quick, Foxy has to know my question here. You said that, virgin at a time when they had not had delivered a child yet.
Speak that, you have to speak much more
Virgin
slowly.
at that time that they had not delivered a child.
Oh, yes. Yeah, man, had not delivered a child. A virgin at that time, yes, right, that's right, you were required to add, and which we lose in English. Because in our day, really, most contemporary European languages, virgin means something else. And you were required to add to the bloodlines regardless of your other sexual preferences. There you go. So in other words, what should be clear, I think, just by looking at this small handful of passages, is that the people who are trying to demonize LGBTQ human beings are deliberately just picking passages that they want to enforce and ignoring a whole lot of others that they know that most people would think were insane if somebody tried to enforce them. And this is the problem. Reverend Scott is now on a soapbox. So if you can put a soapbox image on the recording, I'm standing on it right now. This is why I believe somehow, and I don't know how this could be done safely, that we need to teach people some kind of biblical literacy in public school, because they grow up not having any encounter with looking at the Bible critically, and they go to some church where they have a meaningful, moving experience, and then the preacher tells them this is what the Bible means, and if you want to be good to Jesus, you have to do this. They don't know this stuff. And it's easy to persuade people who really have a desire. Like I have a friend who's the most right-wing, opinionated pain in the foot that you ever want to meet. You know, I'm really glad I'm not on Facebook, because I probably wouldn't talk to him anymore, because Anya's always telling me, oh my God, you should see what Willie put on me. He'll tell you, Jesus saved his life. Jesus saved Willie's life. He was a nut job. You know, he was an addict, and the only thing that he could do to keep from using until he died was an extreme devotion to a narrow understanding of Jesus. Sadly, that includes a lot of other nonsense, but I have no reason to question any of that. What I do have a question is why it has to become law. What I do want to question is why somehow we're supposed to change our culture that we're demonizing entire classes of human beings. To me, that is more evil than anything that anybody's trying to suggest, because as you can see, the Bible is saying a whole lot of things very similar to what those folks are saying about LGBT folks, and they know darn well better than to try and make that stuff public law. Anyway, there you go. Soapbox has now been put back in the closet. All right, so anyway. Oh, wait a minute. Whoa, wait, let me get into that.
Stay on.
All right, soapbox has been put in a much better place. You know, so I need it again. It was really quite, thank you for that. The chance to do my little dance. And so the Bible's also it's silent about all kinds of relationships that don't lead to having children. Silent about it. You know, unlike what we see in Project 2025 and some of these right-wing cultural movements, it does not talk about couples who are unable to have children, except for the one that I read about a man who dies childless, about couples who are too old to have children, like my wife and I, couples who choose not to have children, people who are single, you know. There's so much that the Bible's quiet about. And so, you know, folks who are telling you that they can discern God's plan and they know who to hate and they know who to ban, you know, are the people on this earth to be feared. Sorry, soapbox came out again. So we're any questions about all that? I just want to start us with that foundation before we go into these other things. Yeah.
So most of that fit into the theme of those people being selective as to which pieces they emphasize.
Sure.
Do you have another theme that you can put on the soapbox as to why not on some of the ones we read tonight?
Mm-hmm.
You have the floor.
I'm not sure I understand the question. Sorry.
Okay, everything you said on the soapbox there was about taking passages selectively from the past. Okay, so I was wondering if there's another theme that you can speak of tonight, referring to the passages we read, other than being selective, that is inconsistent with them.
Saying another way to read the Bible.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think my main answer to that is to take the Bible seriously and not literally, no matter where you pick it up and start reading it. You know, it's not intended to be a rule book. I mean, it's not like what the umpire has in his back pocket, you know, behind home plate in the baseball game, you know, let me check the rule book.
I'm familiar that there are many contradictions to it.
And you know, if this book wasn't so rich and complex and contradictory, I don't know if it would have survived as so important for this long, because if it was so easy to understand, we would have a completely different relationship with it. But the fact that it is so various over so long of a time, with so many different authors who have different audiences and different agendas, that's what makes it worth reading. Otherwise, it would just always say the same thing. If you remember when we were talking about Adam and Eve, that we ended up with this interesting notion of Yahweh, of the God in that story, that Yahweh is not a very good parent. Like, God doesn't know how to be God yet in Genesis. So process theology means that God and human beings at the same time overgo a process of maturity and development and learn and wisdom over the ages together, kind of. And God has to learn how to be God, just like we have to learn how to be better human beings. And so I think that is easier to prove in the biblical text than many other assumptions.
So along the lines of picking particular texts or moments from the Bible. So when I was in high school, I took a persuasive speech class, and I learned early on, and this was kind of eye-opening to me, that you can argue any point and you can find statistics and bits and pieces of information to support any argument.
Yeah.
And so this is basically what it appears that some of our, I guess, more conservative people are doing. They just pick and choose different verses or chapters from the Bible that will support their narrative. So you can do the same in any other narrative.
I mean, so anyone's going to pick something from a source they think is authoritative to help make their case when they're making an argument. I do it, everybody does it, right? I mean, because you can't say everything. Like if I want to lift up something in the Bible and talk about it, you know, it's not worth your time. For me to like talk all the ways that it could be different. I'm trying to get you to understand one thing from one angle in this moment, and hopefully our relationship means that I'm presenting this argument, and of course it's open to being questioned, you know. So maybe sometimes it's the spirit of the community that lifts it up, you know, because some people lift these things up not to be questioned, but so you can be corrected, so the hearer can be corrected, and that's what I was taught at the right wing Christian churches that I used to go to. So I used to go to a handful. I was in this really good band with that same guy I was talking about, Willie, the guy that I know Jesus really saved. He was one of the best guitar players I've ever known. And he actually looks a little bit like George Harrison, and he can sound like the Beatles. He's an amazing musician. And I played in this Christian rock band with him, Two-Edged Sword, Christian heavy metal, and we were good. But I would go there and like the preachers would tell you, you come to church so you get it right. So when you go talk about the Bible outside of this place, that you're correcting people's mistakes. Now, there are times when I'm going to suggest that because of a dominant cultural understanding that's being pushed, and I'm doing that tonight. There's a dominant cultural assumption about what the Bible is and isn't, that's being used, but it's being used to harm people, and it's being used to demonize. But still, I hope I'm doing it in the spirit of openness and we're having a long-term conversation. I get up, there's freedom of the pew and freedom of the pulpit. So when I'm up there, it's freedom of the pulpit, and I'm very well aware that there's always a handful of folks in the congregation who probably know about what I'm talking about than I do. And if there's 122 people in the audience, I probably preached 127 sermons because everybody hears it differently, and some people hear more than one, right? So, and so that's hopefully the beauty of the kind of faith that we practice, is that there's a presentation, but there's an expectation that I should receive pushback, especially if I don't say something clearly, if I say something wrong or offensive. That's hopefully the way we do faith here, right? That's our goal, is to do it that way.
There's some comments, I think.
I was just thinking, like the ones that you picked out on your soapbox.
Yes.
Were they later in the Bible? Because the one that you gave us in Leviticus goes on and on and on and on and on about everything. They put everything here.
I'll get to that.
This of my son's daughter, would have been every single relationship, and it doesn't say any of that stuff.
No.
So that how can that preacher that told you to correct their mistakes, which mistakes, their mistakes or his mistakes?
Oh, well, yeah.
This comes
in that
first.
world, the preacher is all. The preacher is the interpreter. There's not an expectation that you have an individual interpretation. You can have a flavor, but the basic, conclusion of the teaching is usually not in question. Anyone who's been to a more conservative or right-wing faith tradition can attest to that experience. So I'll get to that because that's part of what's called the purity codes, and we'll get there. All right. Kenny says this discussion reminds him of how helpful he found the article that was shared, the inerrancy FAQ. Right. Number 4. Do you believe that the Bible is inspired in a way that is different from other books? Yeah. And the author explains the belief that God instructed humanity on what to write in the Bible, but allowed them to make mistakes and have incongruities in order to reflect their own experience. Yes. So the hope is, if you have if you have a sense of understanding of the origin of the Bible, that there definitely was divine influence, that's how I prefer to think of it. I believe a lot of the Bible must have been somehow divinely influenced, whatever that means. But doesn't mean it's still the inerrant word of God, that we're in a spiritual place where we're receiving something. And what we've learned, there's a great set of neurological experiments that they do, like MRIs on monks of different traditions. And they what they were able to do is they would induce a particular kind of experience. And I can't remember if it was chemically or through, I don't remember how it was induced, but the MRI showed the experience to be almost identical from one to the next, but the way they explained it was through the lenses and the understandings, including the prejudices of their own cultures and faith. So at least biologically, they had the same experience, as much as you can test that from person to person. But of course, the Catholic nuns talked a lot about Mary, and the Buddhists talked about, peace, and the Hindus talked about what they talk about. And so all that's just to say no matter how God enters us and inspires us, what's going to come out is still us. And it's still flavored by our particularity and all of our culture and everything that makes us individual human beings with our own stuff, the good and the not so good. It's going to come out, John, and then David.
I really hit on your cultural because to whatever extent some of these things are divinely inspired, they're divinely inspired for people at that time that had the scientific knowledge or the lack of scientific knowledge and medical knowledge that they had. Whereas trying to give the same inspiration to us would just be totally different.
We would explain it differently. Yep, that's it. All right. Any other questions here? We're almost at 7:30. We're making really good time.
Not a question, but I have a comment actually.
Please.
The way you describe the right-wing churches of like correct versus like a discussion and co-creation.
Yes.
Of meaning.
Yeah.
It just made me think, well, that's a great breeding ground for authoritarianism right there.
Of course, the one man has the right answer.
Right, I have the right answer,
Yes.
nobody else, I'm divinely inspired, you just have to follow me.
Sounds familiar.
Right.
Like the kings.
Like a king as well, right? Like versus I remember my old pastor in the Presbyterian church would be very, very happy about I don't know how true it is, but he's like, well, you know, some Presbyterians believe that Presbyterianism was like the start of democratic decision making because it's so God, it's annoying sometimes, but there's so many committees, right? There's so many committees, there's like the
All of the
doesn't have
Protestantism, yes.
as much power as that.
That's right.
You know, so.
Oh, yeah, same in Unitarian Universalism and Baptist,
Like the
Quakers.
which we have a history together, actually.
We do, yeah, and a bit, yeah, we sort of diverted from some of Calvin, but yeah, you know, yeah, the Presbyterian gets their name actually from how they're democratically gathered, from the presbyters or the elders or the representatives of the church, where that name comes from. Debbie Ann, may I impede upon you to go just lock that door, because I don't have any more funds to get out. It's our fun house to get out. No, I left it, I always leave it at 7:30. It's okay. I always have a cache of cash. Yeah, so one of the things I just want you to think about as we go through here is I'm not really trying to cherry pick, I'm trying to demonstrate how the cherry picking is dangerous. And we should probably think it's dangerous for us too, but you know, we all have our favorite, well, not all of us, but I have my favorite Bible passage right now is 2 Timothy 7. God did not grant us the spirit of fear, but of sound judgment and love. And that's what I'm using right now in this troubled time in our country. You know, I'm trying to remember whatever's making me really fearful is not the good. It's not divine, right? So there's nothing wrong with having favorite Bible passages and using them. Anyway, so I'm going to go ahead and move us, unless there's a question or observation before we.
That study that you mentioned.
Yes.
Is what did you know where, when, how, what study that was?
I can locate it. It was in a book that I read. It's seminary. I can't place my mind on it. Actually, I can remember where in the book and what page it starts.
Yeah.
You know, like on the right side, there's really down, but I can't remember what book.
Yeah, I just like.
I have the weirdest
That's
memory in the world.
fascinating,
I can't remember images. I can't, you know, I remember names.
Yeah.
I'm a very strange person. Just ask my wife. All right, what is that? As my mama said, I have a face for radio. She did not say that. Even my mom, I don't want you to be mad at her. She did not say it. Let's see this one. Okay, good. One new next. All right, good. Here we go. I'm gonna share this and keep this up a lot. Make sure, for those of you participating from elsewhere, let me know if you get tired of the screen share. You will see which of your ministers is not the visual one. Because I have like no pretty pictures in this presentation.
Really?
All right. So this is something I actually have this parked on our website, if you ever just want to borrow it yourself,
Oh, yeah.
and share it with anybody. And all right, you know. And I believe that that statement is true, that the Bible says nothing against loving, consensual, same-gender relationships, and this is nothing against them. Okay. Here are the 6 passages, and we'll go through them one at a time. All right. Okay. And see, these are known as the Clobber passages because certain religious systems use them to clobber LGBTQ human beings, fellow citizens. And last I checked, that's not something that should be encouraged or rewarded. All right, so for more than, here we go. Right.
Put that. Here.
Here, a second here. That's what I want to do. Yeah, I want to get rid of that and go back to this. Here we go. For more than 100 years, Bible scholars have agreed that there are no definitive injunctions against loving, consensual, same-gender unions in the Judeo-Christian canon. This is the scholarly consensus. Of course, there are scholars who disagree with this. Additionally, the Catholic Church had rituals to sanctify same-sex unions in medieval Europe, in monasteries. There's a whole book about this. It's a brilliant text.
Yeah.
Send me it's more scholarly than you would want it to be. Which means it's just a little harder to read. But send me an email or a text, and if you can't find it, I think it's just called same-sex unions in medieval Europe. But I think I could be wrong with the exact title. And those who are really using the Bible against LGBT folk in the way that we're seeing in our culture. I mean, if you would have asked people hundreds of years ago, is homosexuality okay? They would have said no, but they're not going to go out of their way to get their legislators to hunt people down and to demonize them, right? These are the new kids on the block. Related to that Chicago statement of inerrancy in some ways, from the late 1800s. And there's only 6 passages in the Bible that may refer to homosexuality. All right, so this is, and I've got these here. You can follow in your own Bible if you like. We went over this in the first class. This is from Genesis 2, from the creation story. So the Lord God caused deep sleep to fall upon the man, and he slept, and then he took one of his ribs and closed up its place with flesh. The rib that the Lord God taken from the man, he made into a woman and brought her to the man. And the man said, "This at last is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. This one shall be called a woman, for out of man this one was taken. And therefore a man leaves his father and his mother and clings to his wife, and they become one flesh. And the man and his wife were both naked and were not ashamed." That's the text drawn from. And here's what my study says the scholarly consensus suggests, that this creation story is really, number one, it doesn't say really anything about homosexuality. It does explain why, a man and a woman come together to create a family. And the text says it's natural that a man and a woman come together. Some people think that anything other than that is necessarily unnatural, but that's not a necessary conclusion, and the Bible actually doesn't say that directly. So that is taking a step beyond. Many read this misinterpretation in the text, even though the text is silent about all kinds of relationships. And I shared these earlier. Couples unable to have children, too old, not to, couples who should not have children. That's a more complicated thing, but that's another thing too. Any questions about that first one before I move on to number 2 out of the 6?
Just not a question, but one of the things I read about this passage was that although polygamy is in the Hebrew Bible, this passage may suggest that the ideal condition for was one.
Why might that be, boys and girls?
There was no one else.
What's that? Ah, that's very good, and that's definitely a great observation.
First time.
Well, so what the Bible isn't as clear about as the Quran is polygamy is part of the culture and it gets written into the sacred text. But if you're gonna have more than one wife, you're expected to be able to take care of them all and treat them all equally, you know?
That's what this is saying.
And so that, you know, there's a great commercial about that. Anybody who's Cedric the Entertainer is, he's walking around, and he sees this guy, and he's got a real, you know, pretty woman on either arm, and he starts dreaming. And then, you know, next thing he knows, you know, he's got one screaming in one ear, one screaming in the other, he's got honey-do lists, and he's like, and the next thing you see him walking down the street with 2 dogs. All right. So be careful what you wish for, right? You know, and, you know, it'd be nice if there was, you know, a reverse gender version of that same story, but, you know, it's the same thing, you know, be careful what you wish for. You know, in short, most people were not encouraged to have more than one spouse because they really couldn't afford it or have the resources to actually treat them the same or give them the proper kind of home. So, you know, working class folks were not going to be polygamous even in ancient times. For the most part, I know there are probably differences to that.
But I'm not making the same leap that I think you're making here.
Please.
This passage talks about where women came from, supposedly, from
Yeah.
the group of men. It's not saying anything about them procreating and having kids.
No, I think you're right. No.
I think you can interpret it either way because it says two become one. So you can interpret that the two coming together form another person, or two coming together form
Family.
a unit of just the man and woman. So I think you can interpret it either way. It's not explicitly saying family.
Okay.
Yeah, and no, but I think both of those are valid readings, I think. But no, you're right, it really doesn't say children.
Yeah, it doesn't.
And, or procreation, so I think that's true too. But this is where it starts. I'm sure you have heard some right-wing Christians say it was Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve, right? You know, right?
Right.
So that's where this, you know, so they think they can take this text for as limited as it is, and that's where they draw this from, right? Because if you're looking at this fairy tale part of the story, which it kind of is, and this seems to be maybe written by the priestly author, not by the Elohim author, who seems to have written the fairy tale part of the Adam and Eve. So they're trying to set the record straight too, but the priests are always trying to remind you what you're supposed to believe. Yeah, it's not clear, and there's no obvious conclusion to make about that. Yeah.
I think you may have missed a comment from somebody.
Yeah, I can't, this is why multi-platform, so I can't watch
No,
all
I
this.
can't read it. It's not showing up on my screen, so I can't read it too.
I just sort of off that topic, I just noticed for the first time, I think that the thing, therefore, a man shall leave his father and his mother and shall cleave unto his wife. And when did it change to that it's the wife that's supposed to cleave to her to the man's family?
Good question.
You know?
So someone who knows the ancient culture better than me would be the one to answer that. Yeah, so this was 221. Okay.
That's me now.
Let's move on. So anybody at home who wants to comment, I'm going to need to hear you because I cannot see the comments on my screen. So just let you guys know.
I just have one comment to make here.
Yeah.
Where in the Bible do women become subjugated? Because definitely it's not in this passage.
Oh, at the end of the Garden of Eden story, and the man shall obey his wife. So that's at the end of the first.
Man shall obey his wife.
Wife. You read that one verse? No.
My reverend told me.
Let's don't tell my wife. No, sorry. The woman, he said, this is Genesis 3:10. I will greatly increase your pangs and childbearing, and pain you shall bring forth children, yet your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you. That's rather blatant. Yeah, so there you go with that. All right, I want to move on. Is that okay?
Yes.
Thank you. And we're gonna move on to Genesis 19. Now, Genesis 19 is in this really rich part of Genesis. I love all these chapters around here. It's got, we're near when a son is promised to Abraham and Sarah, where Abraham is about to have a child with Hagar, to have Ishmael with Hagar because or I think it's already had Ishmael at this point. Because Sarah wasn't able to have a child, and Sarah's like 90 years old, and the child that they have is Isaac, which means Sarah laughed because Sarah's like 90 years old. And she's like, and when she's told by the angels that she's gonna have a kid, she laughs. Because who wouldn't? If you're 90 years old. And so this is the chapter just before this has a son promised to Abraham and Sarah. Where Abraham welcomes the angels of the Lord to his tent to hear the message that he's going to have a son with Sarah. And then the tale of Sodom and Gomorrah is opened, and this part is about this. So I'm just going to read this aloud. The two angels came to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gateway of Sodom. When Lot saw them, Lot is Abraham's brother, for those who don't know their big ass. When Lot saw them, he rose to meet them and bowed down with his face to the ground. He said, "Please, my lords, turn aside to your servant's house and spend the night and wash your feet. Then you can rise early and go on your way." And they said, "No, we will spend the night in the square." But he urged them strongly, so they turned aside to him and entered his house. And he made them feast and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. Before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both young and old, all the people to the last man, surrounded the house, and they called to Lot, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us so that we may know them." And this is literally the "we may know them" biblically. There you go. Lot went out of the door to the men, shut the door after him, and said, "I beg you, my brothers, do not act so wickedly. Look, I have two daughters who have not known a man. Let me bring them out to you, and do to them as you please. Only do nothing to these men, for they have come under the shelter of my roof." Oh boy. But they replied, "Stand back." And they said, "This fellow came here as an alien, and he would play the judge. Now we will do worse with you than with them." And then they pressed hard against the man Lot and came near the door to break it down. But the men inside reached out their hands and brought Lot into the house with them and shut the door. And they struck with blindness the men who were at the door of the house, both small and great, so that they were unable to find the door. And then the men said to Lot, "Have you anyone else here, sons-in-laws, daughters, anyone you have in the city? Bring them out of the place, for we are about to destroy this place, because the outcry against this people has become great before the Lord, and the Lord has sent us to destroy it." So Lot went out and said to his sons-in-law who were to marry his daughters, "Up, get out of this place, for the Lord is about to destroy the city." But he seemed to his sons-in-law to be jesting, even though they just watched all this go down. And so these are angels. So before I start sharing some of my response to this, what y'all think it is?
Tim's response.
Sure.
Okay.
Sorry, no, I just thought it was interesting that in my text it says, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us so that we can have sex with them." Like it just directly says it.
Which translation?
That's the New International Version.
And okay. Yeah. Well,
So I found that just an interesting difference.
Oh, okay, you have
We can have intercourse with them.
Yeah, yours is the New English Bible, is that right?
Yeah, Oxford.
Yeah, but that's
New English Bible, yeah.
Yep, that's the translation.
It's better than no. I mean, at least in terms of a translation for modern readers.
It is. It's much better. It's much better than no.
Because you could actually, I think some Shakespeare plays use the word no, and it's to be understood that it is to have sex with someone.
Because the King James, what was Shakespeare's theater company called?
Oh God, don't ask me that.
Yeah.
They were the King James players.
Ah, that's right.
Oh.
So it's the same time. That's why some people believe Shakespeare may have had something to do with writing some passages of the Bible, because here's an aside. it is widely believed by some scholars, though it's not a consensus, that King James was a very sexual human being who had sex with people of all genders. And stuff that happens in the court when you're a king for the long time gets out. So what better way to prove you might be holy than to commission a group of the best writers of the land to put out a new version of the Bible, a new English translation. It's like the first thorough English translation of the Bible since Henry VIII has decided to break from Rome. Yeah, so King James comes in somewhere in the late 15 whatevers and after Elizabeth and then King Henry VIII, he dies in like the 1520s, 1530s. And so we haven't had an English language version of the Bible that's really thoroughgoing and considered very well written. And so some scholars believe the reason he put so much energy and money into this is to try to get the favor of the religious people, because and it's believed that Shakespeare in Richard II, I can't remember if it's Richard II or Richard III, the king has a lot of, seems like they're gay lovers, Bushy and Bagot, if you know how well you know the Shakespeare canon. They believed he was making fun of King James, and somehow King James missed it. Anyway, so sometimes the very reason a version of the Bible gets created has very little to do with theology or piety. Anyway, so that's all of that. There you go. What do you know? Other observations? Thank you.
Again,
Oh, Mary first, and then you, sir.
Okay, first thing I'm noticing here is that these two angels came. They didn't identify who they were, but these angels came and they were already on their way to the city. Had nothing to do with the people from the village coming out.
No, that's true. But Lot knows that they're angels. That's why he bows down to the ground. Yes.
Okay, so now we get into this other story that people have interpreted as the reason why Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed, which is because the angels were foreigners. The men from the wanted to have sex with them. But there's another story where it is worse, and that's text of terror with trouble. It was trouble. In Judges, it's almost exactly the same thing, except it's worse.
Yep.
It seems as though if you read the two texts, you have foreigners coming in, the men in the village want to have sex with them. The host of the foreigner says, no, have my daughter instead.
Yeah.
And in this case, it didn't happen, and the other one it did.
Yeah.
But it seems as though this was a practice that was going on at that time.
So that's,
and this is in Judges and in Genesis.
so there are reflections. So I'll come back to that, David.
One of the things that I read was that in offering up his two daughters instead of these two males, Lot was probably obeying the law of Oriental hospitality, which guaranteed protection of visitors. So his proposal to hand over his daughters showed his determination to put first his obligation as a host.
That's an old
sense.
It's an old interpretation. So let's keep thinking about this though. And I'll get to some of the things that I've discovered that makes sense to me. Number one, they're angels, but they're in the form of men. Number two, they seem the least bit interested in having sex with these other men. So let's be careful using the word sex. All right. Yes, and because this is not particularly hospitable, in my understanding. And so and they are coming because just before this in Genesis 18, they've been told that there is wickedness in Sodom and in Gomorrah. So let's figure out what that might be. I'm going to move this on. So I think the evidence suggests that Sodom and Gomorrah is about rape and inhospitality. I think it's about inhospitality because they want to just have their way with these angels. So this isn't consensual. So this is about rape, and that's not hospitable. So, and he wouldn't be required if they were just men from the village to offer up his daughters. I have a little bit of a problem with that old interpretation. And this is about violence and inhospitality. It's not about sex.
So
They
why
wanna
was Sodom and Gomorrah attacked and not like in Judges? When the Benjaminite came
I don't
there,
know.
if this was something that God finds so offensive,
You have to
why
ask the
doesn't he
Almighty.
do it to these other cities?
Well, maybe this, you gotta remember, these are written about supposed ancient times. And maybe what they were really writing about, and this is very much part of the culture of the Middle East. I'm gonna tell you a story about the painting, but I'm actually telling you a story about something else. And but there's no one who can answer that question, Mary. And just, it's good to remember that rape is not sex, it's violence. The story is not about sex. The story shows the Israelite culture value of hospitality being violated, implying that it's an unholy to be inhospitable. It says nothing about loving consensual same-sex relationships. All right, the purity codes. This is where you tried to take us, Victoria. Leviticus. So there's a whole section. Who can tell me who the Levites were or are in Hebrew culture? Who are the Levites? What roles did they play? Levi, one of the 12 brothers who the 12 tribes of Israel. The Levites are the priests. The Levites are the priests. So Leviticus is very, more than most of them, is the priests writing the rules. So if there's any book in the Bible that is more than another trying to just be a rule book, it's Leviticus. And we had shared earlier some of those passages in Leviticus for which someone should be stoned. Another one is if you wear a garment made of 2 different fabrics. Check your labels of what you're wearing. Who knows why these rules are such? I had a really interesting professor in Fishbein, Rabbi Fishbein at University of Chicago. And of course, all of us who didn't grow up Jewish, all of us who were budding theologians, but couldn't spell it with a capital T yet. We were like, oh, they didn't have a very scientific worldview. Oh, they were just, no. He said, no. All of the Leviticus stuff, not all of it, but he said most of it was a demarcation that we're the people that do this and the people that don't do that. And the reason that was important is because twice in a century they had been taken into exile. And the only way they maintained their culture for that time was by doing this and not doing that. The fact that after the second exile, where they were away for some 67 years, and able to kind of still be the same people with the same religion, the same culture, means they kept to themselves, they did this, and they didn't do that. And so when they came back, they had already begun to write all that stuff down. And then we have Nehemiah and Hezekiah, the ones who say they discover the ancient texts again or discover new books. And they reestablish what's known as the cult of the temple or the religious observance of the temple, but with new rules, or with the rules finally written down in a way that probably wouldn't have been. So Rabbi Fishbein said, if I can dispel no other notion out of your head, the injunction against eating pork has nothing to do with trichinosis. Very few people in the history of humankind have ever had trichinosis. We're the people that do this, and we don't do that. All the people around them in Babylon ate pork. The only way they kept themselves as a separate people, we're not going to eat pork. All the people around them up to the north, on the coast, ate shellfish. We don't eat shellfish. This is how we know who we are and how we know who we are not. All the rest of it is conjecture and put on top and a misunderstanding of the role of that cultural demarcation.
So it's rules to define their tribe versus other tribes.
Bingo. Prize goes to the man in the red shirt.
Like all the cultures that we looked at in your, what was that book that we did a year or so?
Yes, yes, the dawn of everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, it's called, there's something called schismogenesis, where cultures will define themselves deliberately against the culture nearest them, and they'll find reasons to say that they're not as pious or they're not as, honorable. And we see it, that exists today, often between like the urban, suburban, rural divides in our country.
Yeah, the
Right.
Democrats and the Republicans almost.
It can be a party too, right there, because our tribes are no longer geographically centered all the time. Yeah, that's true. Any questions? I put a lot out there.
What you just said though is also saying that at that time, men were having sex with men all the time.
Thank you. Obviously, they were surrounded by cultures
Yeah.
that were fine with homosexuality. And sadly, maybe even rape. Right?
Yeah.
All right. Purity codes. So the purity codes are those sort of codes in Leviticus that start to tell you everything it's supposed to be, you're supposed to not do. And let's see. And so all these things, which so it's really Leviticus like 11 through 15, and it happens in other places too, here in 18. The holiness codes too, 17 through 26. It's also called the holiness codes. So let's just look at this one. It says you shall not lie with the male as with the woman. It is an abomination.
Where are you starting?
This is from Leviticus 18, it's on the screen, Leviticus 18:22. You shall not lie with the male as with the woman, it is an abomination. This is about consensual, not about consensual relations, but about prostitution and promiscuity.
I didn't think that.
All right, yes, yes. So the reason being is, number one, their culture did not have a way for same-sex couples to have a sanctified relationship. So if you're having a sexual relationship outside of your wife, you're having a promiscuity relationship. But you're also not supposed to have sex with a woman that's not your wife. You're not supposed to have sex with anyone but your wife. So the fact, as Alex looked it up, that they have to have this actual line means that there's cultures around them, and as we talked about last week, all the cultures of the world, and certainly cultures nearby, are always coming through where they live, because they're going to the coast, they're going to Africa, they're going to Europe, they're going to Asia. So they have all these rules, so you don't start acting like these other people. Remember who you are. These are our rules as a society. If a man commits adultery with the wife of his neighbor, both the adulterer and the adulteress shall be put to death. The man who lies with his father's wife has uncovered his father's, the man who lies with his father's wife has uncovered his father's nakedness. Both of them shall be put to death. Their blood is upon them. If a man lies with his daughter-in-law, both of them shall be put to death. They have committed perversion, their blood is upon them. If a man lies with the males with a woman, both of them have committed abomination, they shall. So everybody's supposed to be put to death, right? Everyone's being put to death unless you just have there's one sanctified relationship of sex, and that is it. So none of this is about loving relationships. The author is addressing the sin of having sex for its own sake, of using another person or an animal or to meet one's own selfish sexual needs. Even Philo the Jew, who lives at the time of Christ, says these verses refer to an injunction against shrine prostitution. We'll get to a little bit more of that coming up. The context makes it clear that these are purity regulations designed to keep holy Israel separate from unholy Canaan, their nearest neighbors. We're the people that do this. We don't do that. That's what these are all about. And we don't know that because we did not grow up in, and we are not embedded in their culture. Right?
I'm sorry, where does it say that they shall be put to death?
Leviticus 27 to 13, 20, chapter 27 to 13. Yeah, it's in the, yeah, you got it.
Mine doesn't say there.
There you go.
Ripster?
Yes,
One thing about the two passages in Leviticus that you gave us.
Yes, please.
18:22 and 20:13, they both speak of same-sex relationships between men, not between women.
I know. Oh, see, we've got another astute observer in the room. You get the next gold prize. Yeah, that's true. You can say that. Here we go. Let's keep going, because of course, the Bibles are written by men, and by the time it gets canonized, it's the Roman civilization, which is particularly hostile to women, so they really don't care much about it. So loving, committed, so I already read this, sorry. So Jesus himself declares these holiness codes as obsolete. I think there's a very justifiable way to read these holiness codes as obsolete, all right? These codes are meant for a desert nomadic people living 3,000 years ago. They are not applicable to a modern pluralistic society such as today's USA or modern Israel. I was doing this with an Israeli Jew when I wrote this for the first time 15 years ago. Repeatedly, Jesus and Paul say in the Bible that these laws are not applicable to their time, and their time is 2,000 years ago from today. It's more important, Jesus says, to love God with all your heart and soul, and to love your neighbor as yourself. It's that spirit is much more important to Jesus than the law. He talks more about the prophets, but Jesus is not. This is why Jesus's ministry is seen as a new way in his time. It's why he makes fun of the Pharisees who go out of their way to make sure everyone knows that they're obeying all the laws but they're not actually kind people doing good things in the world.
It's interesting you say that. I remember years ago when there was conservatives against Muslim people because their idea of like, oh, if they take over, they're going to want to institute Sharia law. And I'm just like, is that projection?
Yes.
Because we want to institute these morality codes.
Man, there's prizes of galore tonight. Very good. Yeah. All right. Okay, and of course, we talked about some of these, and there's lots of these things. It's Exodus and Leviticus, there's passages that support slavery, passages against eating shrimp, pigs, and crabs, which being from Baltimore, please. Against working on the Sabbath, I wouldn't have a job. So when people ask you to vote against gay marriage, and then you can tell when I wrote this, ask them why they don't want to legislate all the holiness code.
Well, that was a rule for the people, not for the priests.
Oh, that's right. That's true. All right, so this is more of those holiness code. Oh, we already went through this one. I read this one at the beginning. But we don't enforce any of these laws, about stoning people to death because of this, that, or the other, because Revelation, I'm willing to use that term, has shown us they are not for us or our time. Revelation is showing us that same-sex marriage is not to be deemed sinful. And so, yes.
A question about Leviticus. When I was reading Leviticus, when I was reading 18, my eyes strayed to the end of 17. There's a section called the sanctity of blood. Is that where the rules come about how to butcher animals for it to be kosher?
Yeah, there's a lot of concern about bodily fluids in Leviticus and Exodus, particularly blood.
Yeah.
Which is probably because of their understanding of blood and what it was, has a lot to do with the restrictions against women, during menstruation. Right. It's all wrapped up in the same thing. So I just talked about this, and there you go. Leviticus also outlet laws wearing clothing made of more than one fabric, and it's deemed as much a sin as lying with a man as with a woman. And you can tell how old this is. When I first started, I need to change his name now. Even Rick Santorum wouldn't ask us to legislate all the purity codes. All right, we're going to move on to the Christian scriptures, and what is commonly called the New Testament says almost nothing about homosexuality, and Jesus says nothing about it at all. So when someone's trying to beat you over the head with their dashboard Jesus, just say, hold on, still that little bobblehead. Let's have a conversation here, because I think something exists that doesn't. All right. Romans. I love Romans. It's one of such a rich book. It's a lot of history, a lot of theology. And so let's see. So Romans. Romans 1:26-27. I forgot to mark something. I'm taking my time. Okay. So Romans 1:26, for this reason, God gave them up to degrading passions. Their women exchanged natural intercourse for unnatural. And in the same way, also the men giving up natural intercourse with women were consumed with passion for one another. Men committed shameless acts with men and received in their own persons the due penalty for their error. This is what the film we're going to see is going to go at directly, and why it's called a mistranslation. And the film is going to make the case that it was deliberate. All right, we're going to move to an explanation. What the mistranslation deliberately leaves out is that this refers to shrine prostitution and promiscuity. And I know Foxy probably knows more about this than me. Paul's writing this letter to Rome after his missionary tour of the Mediterranean. And each city that he visits, Paul will see great temples built to honor Aphrodite, Dionysus, and other fertility god and goddesses of sex and passion. All these gods and goddesses that are like considered the state religion, and a good citizen is expected to be seen paying homage to Aphrodite or Dionysus, to be a good citizen. And all these, but none to the one true God that Paul honors, right? And it seems that Greek priests and priestesses engaged in a variety of sexual behaviors. Some of them castrated themselves. Some of them encouraged carrying on drunken sexual orgies, even having sex with young temple prostitutes, male and female, all to honor the gods of sex and pleasure. Paul seeks to ask Christians to set themselves apart from those other cultures around them by abstaining from casual sex and temple prostitution. That's what these passages are about. This passage asks us to honor our bodies, not to use them merely as for pleasure or to honor false gods, but to refrain from treating one another as a means to an end. This is meant to urge us to control ourselves, but not just give in to every impulse. That's a positive way to see it, perhaps. And in the same text, Paul tells people not to marry. Because Paul thinks Jesus is coming back, I don't know, middle of next week. So why bother getting married and having to go through all that when you need to prepare for Jesus? Because Jesus is going to be back in a fortnight. We do not honor that injunction, of course, and this is because Paul and the early Christians, he was coming back. And Jesus' imminent return meant they should make themselves more holy, but not having sex of any kind. Yes, Paul tells all people not to marry. And when pressed on the question, Paul says, if you cannot wait for Jesus to return, I guess it's better to marry than to burn in desire and perhaps act like the pagan priests and priestesses. And many scholars believe Paul was someone who hated his body. A lot of his passages he seems to have no love of pleasure, which is very un-Jewish. The Jewish canon is, we read songs last week. It's very not traditionally Jewish. That's one of the things I think some Muslims have a problem with Judaism. Judaism celebrates all kinds of pleasure, including drinking. The whole holiday of Purim is about excess. You're drinking a little too much, having a little more sex than you might normally have, and as a holy holiday, right? Not all Jews or Christians believe this, and there's no reason that we should. The Jews especially celebrate the body as a holy gift. Tradition has elevated the sexual reservations of this one man, Paul, as the example that everyone is supposed to follow. And this is a mistake I'm willing to claim and have and we'll do again, and I think it needs to be ignored and resisted. The body, I believe, is also holy. Committed partner love within the bonds of affection and mutual relationship includes a vibrant and holy sex life. And I wonder, will misguided believers also ask to legislate all of this passage and outlaw marriage of any kind? Second,
This is Sil. I have a question.
please.
In some of my readings about Paul, there is the notion that he probably studied with the mystic schools in Ephesus. And I have often wondered if Paul's, and so being a mystic, he could say the same thing but have two completely different meanings. And so one thing depending on whether you were in the club or outside the club of mystics, and I'm wondering if his all of his negative things he says about the body is really his negative things about the earthly life as opposed to the spiritual plane.
I think there's something definitely to suggest about that. And when we talked about that last week, that there in a lot of the ancient cultures, not all of them, but a lot of ancient cultures, there was this almost directional understanding that since God must live in the sky, then my thoughts and my concepts are more holy, and the closer I get to the earth, the less clean and less holy it is, or I am. And so that's why what's below the waist was considered less holy than what is above the neck.
Because of the chakras.
Yeah, and well, I mean, all of that stuff. And so, yeah, I have a problem with the chakras for the same reason, right? I have a completely different understanding of all this stuff. And so, and there you go. Thank you for that.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, I'm gonna go back to this. We are making unbelievable time. It is, in fact, it's 8:12. All right, so 1 Corinthians 6:9. 1 Corinthians I love 1 Corinthians. Whoever has been lucky enough, that sounds a little arrogant. Whoever has heard me preach about 1 Corinthians 13, the one passage you often hear at weddings, love is patient, love is kind, has nothing to do with weddings. It has to do with there's conflict in the Corinthian church, and he's trying to remind people how they're supposed to be getting along. You are here to love one another and to be patient with one another and to understand that people are going to say and do dumb things and just, try to be kind in how you redirect them. That's all about community building, right? So anyway, and 1 Corinthians 15:22, if you want a good proof text for universalism. 1 Corinthians 15:22. This was the one that I quoted to the Baptist preacher when I was asked to stop going to Sunday school. For as all die in Adam, so all will be made alive in Christ. Paul says that, right? Not some, not only the believers, he says all. So that's a universalist proof text for those of you who collect such things. 1 Corinthians 15:22. But no, heavens no. All right, this is 1 Corinthians 6:9. Do you not know that wrongdoers will not inherit the kingdom of God? Don't be deceived. Fornicators, idolaters, adulterers, male prostitutes, sodomites, thieves, the greedy, drunkards, revilers, robbers, none of these will inherit the kingdom of God. That's how it's translated. Let's see, maybe what it might be. And then this is similar to it. This means understanding that the law is laid down not for the innocent, 1 Timothy 1:10, but for the lawless and disobedient, for the godless and the sinful, for the unholy and profane, for those who kill their father or mother, for murderers, fornicators, sodomites, yabba-dabba-doo, whatever else is contrary to the sound teaching that conforms to the glorious gospel of the blessed God which he entrusted to me. Right? What's really being said or overlooked here? Here's where a couple of, like I like to call Buck Nickel 90 words will help you put this into context. And this refers to some of the discussions we were just having about Greek temple priests and gods and goddesses in temples. The Malakoi and the Arsakoitai. All right. The two Greek words translated male prostitutes and sodomites in the previous passages are malakoi and arsenokoitai. Malakoi means effeminate, weak, or soft, and is a slang word used for call boys whom older men took to bed while they were cheating on their wives on the down low. This is not necessarily, again, about loving same-sex equitable relationships. This is about prostitution. Arsenokoitai means adultery, sex out of relationship or wedlock. For some reason, I can share all this. You don't need to take a picture of this. Means adultery, sex outside of relationship or wedlock. The context here is one of heterosexual immorality. Homosexuality as such is not the topic in these passages. Paul simply mentions the sort of abusive, exploitative homosexuality that goes on between call boys and their customers as one example of this sort of immorality the Christians in Corinth should avoid. And this speaks against promiscuity, not homosexuality per se. Any kind of promiscuity, any kind of sex out of the marriage contract. Treating people and the body with care and reverence, is a theme, not a specific injunction against an entire class of human beings. All right?
You're sending this to us, right?
Yeah.
Sure, it's on the website. On our website too, but yeah, I'll share, of course I'll share this. The Bible is the story of God's love for the world and the people of the world. It tells the history of God's love at work, rescuing, renewing, and empowering humankind. In between the crazy passages, it does this anyway. It was never intended to be a book about human sexuality. There are no injunctions, I believe, in the Judeo-Christian sacred scriptures against loving, committed, mutual homosexual relationships of any or no gender. So why the outrage? Political power. We all know this, right? This is why it is a sticking issue. I never forget my brother. My brother was involved in libertarian politics in Maryland in the 1990s and early 2000s. And he knew that the Libertarian Party was originally founded in response to the civil rights movement and all that. But the group he was with was multiracial and it moved beyond that. But when he would try and talk to Republicans at a county fair where he had his little libertarian stand, they would say, "We agree with you, but what about the gay?" And public Republican officials would say, we can't abandon that issue. That gets us a lot of votes. They would say it to him directly, right? Because his point was, same-sex marriage is a libertarian issue. We should let them be, right? Anyway, so there you go. So this is an issue for one reason, for political power. I'm not saying some people don't honestly believe that the Bible says that, but no individual's interpretation, especially when the scholarly consensus suggests that it's not very close to what folks think could be correct, should be the public law that governs all of us. So the white religious right won its first political battles in the late 20th century, in the 1970s, denying gay rights. Who remembers Anita Bryant? Her crusade, Miss Orange Juice, crusading against gay rights. And they refused to bend on this issue for fear of losing votes and power. Theological literacy. Too few people know how to ably read and analyze scripture and take it seriously. Encouragement by religious leaders to place people's worst hates and fear onto the will of the Almighty. Unitarian and Universalist thinkers have spoken about this for a long time. Hosea Ballou, not really speaking about gay rights, but he denied the existence of hell because he said, of course, I as a human being, if someone harms somebody in my family, I want them to pay, and I want them to pay dearly, and I might even want them to pay forever. But that's my will. That's not the will of God. So this is a projection of our worst inclinations onto the will of the Almighty. All right. And there's fear born, of course, of rapid social change. And we certainly have seen that, with the hatred that's aimed at our trans kindred, right? And so what do? They find their Bible, which often is a pretty big book, and start throwing it at people. That's my, so solution, study your Bible, know it well, use it as a tool of freedom and justice, be ready to engage it seriously. Always engage those who misuse the Bible for hatred and homophobia and argue it from within the text and the tradition. It's not enough to say, I don't believe in that. That ends the conversation. I'm hoping that I'm equipping a lot of teachers to help set people straight. That's the reason, one of the main reasons I do these classes. All right, Bible says nothing against loving consensual homosexual relationships. The end. All right, there's a whole lot. I'm known to do that. All right.
And you said that was on the website.
It's on our website. It's been on there since I got here. And I will include it when I send out a message about next week's class.
Good.
Yeah.
I didn't see that.
Sign up on it one time.
Anyway, yes. Questions, observations, disappointments, reasons for celebration, who's getting the first round, just tell me something. I've done a lot of talking tonight, but I knew I was doing presentation and I wanted to get through this, and I hope you appreciated how I did this.
Kenny has a question.
Kenny, ask a question.
No, just excellent presentation. It definitely outlined a lot of the comments and questions that I had about the passages we read, as well as just overall how they relate to the theme of the course. So I appreciated the way everything was given that perspective, I guess.
John Lydon.
Your suggestion on the slide of knowing it well,
Well, as well as you can.
yeah.
It's okay. I said that growing up Baptist, yeah, right.
I'm not motivated to know it that well, but I think the key thing is remembering that Old versus New Testament, that Jesus said it was more important to love your neighbor, as you said before, right?
Than to follow the law.
Than to follow these very old laws.
He says, I'm not here to abolish the law, I'm here to fulfill the law, and it's seen as a replacement. Because what happens is the Christ project, the new way that Jesus brings, which initially is supposed to be a revision of Judaism. They realize that in order for it to flourish, and in Book of Acts, it's suggested that it's meant to be for non-Jews too, and they know they're not going to be able to get non-Jews to obey these old laws from the purity codes of Leviticus, because those laws were meant for the Hebrew people to stay the Hebrew people. But now you're trying to get the Gentiles to embrace the Jesus message. And so you have to have a different set of laws and rules. Yep. All right, I'm going to go ahead and say thank you. David is willing to host a class next Thursday. I will be in the building, but across the hall, crunching numbers.
I'll have a ready.
And so if you want to hold a class, raise your hand if you want to have another class, because David's good at this too. Yeah, so they could come to class. So David, I would love if you would share with me like one or two places in the Bible that you want folks to look at. If you could do that to me by Monday, I'll send it out hopefully on Monday, if not really early Tuesday. And then we want everyone else to come to class with something from the Bible that you want to talk about. And David will help manage the conversation. He's going to need some help. Debbie Ann, thanks for being here as always. Let's hear from Debbie Ann. I could not do this without having someone actually manage the text. Oh my goodness. Yes. What's that?
On the subject, couple classes.
It doesn't have to be on the subject of the Bible. It does not have to be on sexuality necessarily. No.
Okay.
And don't forget to come to the movie night next Friday. If you haven't register already. It's free. Maddie and Alex are going to host. I've got out Montclair trying to push it. I sent it to the Montclair Interfaith Clergy Association, which, you know, not all my colleagues on that will want to come to this, but that's the way the interfaith world works. And so there you go. So looking forward to seeing you all next Thursday. I'll probably pop my head in and, you know, give you a big smile while I'm punching numbers across the hall. But please let me know if this works. This is a different kind of Bible study than Because this was meant to be topic specific and driven to, for a point of view, so I wanna make sure you know that, right? I was trying to get you to see a certain things a certain way. You know, we can all have, please be quiet while I'm talking. Please, because we can all have different opinions about that. And so it's gonna be a lot, of course, you know, and I don't, you know, again, freedom of pew, freedom of pulpit, right? So I just wanna put, I wanted to get through a certain lens of understanding and analysis that you can take with you. I will share that document with you as well, that I just was teaching from, I guess I was preaching from a little bit.
I have a question when you're done, Reverend Scott.
Sure, go ahead, Leanne.
I'm wondering, I'm going to be in Puerto Rico for the next couple of weeks, and so I can't come to the movie. But is it streaming anywhere?
Yes, that's how we're playing it. It's streaming on Amazon, right? And other
Yeah, you
places.
can get it on Amazon.
Yeah.
Oh, fantastic! Great, thank you.
If you want to give Mr. Bezos more money, I'm not sure he needs more of our money, but whatever.
You might be able to stream it on something else on the website. There might be other options if you.
Yeah, it may have its own website. We're gonna look into that this week. We're gonna test drive it on Thursday to make sure everything works. At our tech run through. But I just want to really thank you and next Bible study I'm going to do is going to be much more different. It's going to be more what they call the kind where we really Lectio Divina, where we're going to just really focus on smaller passages and read them 2 or 3 times and let them affect us differently each time. It's not going to be so topic driven, so sort of, you know, conclusion driven. But I just want to make sure you know that I'm very aware that this was a conclusion driven, you know, class. So, you know, I don't want you to think that I'm pretending something other way.
When's that gonna be?
What's that?
The date?
That I don't know yet. I gotta figure that out. And I may just do that kind of thing at the summertime theology on tap. So this may be happening again at Tierney's. And then it'll happen again next winter and then next spring. So, all right. Love you all real good, as we say in Baltimore. And go ahead and stop that recording. Thank you, boss.